Hey everybody, welcome to the Happiness Highway. I'm Dr. Gary Sprouse, the Less Stressed Doc. And we're here in our podcast and we're trying to get you to stay in your happy place all the time. And we're gonna work on defining what your happy place is and then working on the things that are keeping us from getting in the happy place. And I wanna welcome my lovely wife, my co-host, Terri.
Hi. Hi.
Drive on Happiness Highway.
So today we're going to talk about something a little bit more somber. So I was talking to a client of mine the other day, and unfortunately for her, her boyfriend died. And it was about 6 months ago. And as I'm talking to her, she's feeling incredibly guilty. At the same time, she's grieving. And so this is a double whammy of really negative feelings. And so I wanted to explore today why that is and how can we get rid of some of those negative feelings around that. And I know my wife, Terri, you've had this experience.
Yes, before I met Gary, I was previously widowed. My husband unfortunately passed away at work and we worked together, and we had only been married 16 months to the day.
He was a lot younger than you too, right? So this was totally unexpected.
Yeah, it was totally unexpected. He was 10 years younger than me.
So we were talking about this earlier, and when I was talking about what we're gonna do in this episode, you're like, well, but I didn't feel guilty. So what was it that was going on for you that you didn't feel guilty in this situation?
A couple of things. One, a lot of people feel guilty when someone passes away because they missed an opportunity to say goodbye or to say that last I love you. And ironically, the night before Joe passed away, he came home from work with flowers for no reason. No reason at all other than to say he loved me. And the next morning when he went to work, my last words to him were, I love you, have a good day. So we had that closure, that final moment where you wished you could have said. The other half is, I'm really strong in my faith. And I heard recently a definition of grief in that it was, they were ready for their wings before your heart was. And I did feel grief. I did feel grief. I sorely missed him. But I did not feel guilty because I knew he was going to a better place.
Each day, we don't know if we're gonna be alive the next day. So we should treat every day like it's our last day, because every morning when I wake up, I get 10 points of, yay, I woke up, right? But we don't know what day that's gonna be when you don't wake up. So no matter how angry, how frustrated, how bad your relationship is or whatever's going on for the day, you should spend each day thinking, hey, this is the last time I'm gonna see this person. And was it really that important? Right, so that if you get to bed each night and go, hey, I love you, or you're the best person in my life, whatever, if something bad happens, you're prepared, right? So think about each day as your last day, not in a somber way, but in a way that you can appreciate the time that you have together, because who knows when it's gonna end. In your case, it was like, he was like 10 years younger than you, and there was like no hint of any unhealth going on, right? So it's like, you never know.
He had an undiagnosed congenital heart condition.
Yeah.
We had no idea he had it.
The client that I was talking with, what she said was that he had had some heart problems, and she had actually helped save him once, and then he decided he didn't want to go to the doctor and he didn't want to take the medications, and so she was doing everything she could to convince him to do that, despite her telling him to do these things or asking him to do these things or helping him do these things, he still wouldn't do it. So he actually died in her arms. And so she felt like there was something that she should have done to bring him back to life. And that's why she felt so guilty. Like she felt like she hadn't done enough. You know, as a doctor, I worked in nursing homes where I had a lot of patients on hospice. And patients on hospice, when they're at home, we know they've already chosen they want to die. But I had to spend a lot of time with these patients, families, because I had to prepare them. And I'm saying, look, this person has decided they're gonna die, but we don't know what they're gonna die from. Like they might die of their cancer or their pneumonia or whatever it is that's the main problem right now, but they also might die because they fell down the steps, or they might die because they fell out of bed, or they might die because they stopped eating, and no matter what you're doing to try to get them to eat, they're not. And it's like, so I would prepare patients, families, and say, look, no matter what you do, this person is not gonna be with us any longer. So it doesn't matter what happens, because we already are in the process of feeling comfortable that they're not going to be with us anymore. So I don't want you to feel like you did something wrong that led to this person's dying, because they're already in that process of dying. Which brings up that idea of guilt, right? So I want to redefine guilt and say, look, guilt is I broke a rule. I did something wrong. It doesn't matter if the rule's written down, if it's a law. It could be, like, this is something that I had to learn, right? A lot of women feel guilty because they didn't do enough with their kids. And I go, well, that's not really guilt, it's really regret. Like, you made some choices, and so that's why you ended up not spending as much time with your kid because you went to work, right? But one of the people talked to me and they said, look, you're missing something. I'm upset. And he said, because there's an unwritten rule that says women should be taking care of their kids. And so when you're not taking care of
I'm guilty of that.
Yeah.
Or I feel guilty from that.
So when you're not taking care of your kids, you're feeling like you broke a rule, even though it was an unwritten rule. And as a guy, it was like, what is that rule, right? It's like, so you and this other woman were kind enough to explain to me how this works. So I got educated, right? So breaking a rule can be anything, right? So if you're taking care of somebody and they die, then there's a certain, I guess, rule that would say, hey, you should have kept that person alive. That's not going to be possible in every situation. So in this lady's case, she had done a lot of stuff. She had done CPR on them. She had done a lot of different things, and it just didn't work. And as a doctor, I had to learn this, right? Because as a doctor, I'm taking care of people. Like, if I measured how good I was as a doctor by whether people lived or not, I would be in trouble because everybody's dying somewhere along the line. And I'm glad I'm a doctor now versus when I was a doctor 100 years ago or 200 years ago, because the things I can do now, way more than I used to be able to do. But I still have limitations. So people are still gonna die. And so I had to realize that I didn't do anything wrong for this person to die. And so I didn't beat myself up with guilt. So when you realize, hey, I did everything I could, and despite all my efforts, the person died, then the guilt should just go away. I mean, you don't need it. You don't need to beat yourself up because you're grieving, so you don't need to add the double whammy of grief and guilt at the same time. So then the other thing, and I think you mentioned your faith, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I say to patients is, you're not God. And I'm going to let that sink in for a second. You are not God. You are not omnipotent and omniscient and all-powerful. You do not get to decide when someone lives or when someone dies. There are things that you can do, but you can't stop it from happening, right? There's a finite time that we're here on earth. You don't get to say when someone goes. Now, what I will tell you is, and this is what I did as a doctor, is that there are things you can do. Like, you can do things to make sure your kids are safe. Like, you know, don't let them ride motorcycles when they're 5 years old, right? Like, or don't let them jump off a cliff, right? Where were we at? In Utah? Was it Utah? Where people are jumping off a cliff with a parachute?
Oh, that was Idaho.
Idaho,
They were jumping off of a bridge, doing some base jumping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would not let my kid do that.
I wouldn't even let me do that.
Yeah, right. I was like, yeah. Anyway, so, but there are also some skills that you can get, right? So I would encourage everybody, go out and learn how to do CPR. So then if one of your loved ones starts struggling, you can do that. And I had to do this. At Christmas dinner with my family, my mom lost consciousness. And I'm sitting at the dinner table, and she just kind of blanks out. And my sister, who's a nurse, is looking at me and screaming. I'm looking at my mom, and she's pale and not responding. I'm like, ah! And so I run over, we laid her on the floor, and I'm going, I'm going to be doing CPR on my mother on Christmas Day. This is not a good situation. But I knew how to do CPR. Now, fortunately, as soon as we laid her down on the floor, she woke right up. And it turned out she had this is what we call a vasovagal reaction. It's the same reaction if somebody's like getting a needle and they pass out. It's that same kind of reaction. So as soon as we laid her down, blood got back to her brain and she woke up. And I was like, Mom, you need to go to the hospital. And she's like, no, I don't want to go to the hospital. I was like, oh, she's back. So we did take her to the hospital and she was fine, yay. But I had that skill that if I needed to, I could have been doing CPR while we're waiting for the ambulance to come. So I would encourage you. These are the kind of things that you can do to be prepared. So that means like learn how to do CPR. Learn what people's medicines are, what they're allergic to. Figure out like if they have any other medical conditions that you're aware of, right? Say goodbye, say I love you. All these things are things you can do to prepare in case something bad should happen. So that, and here's the key, so you don't feel guilty, right? Just like where you were incredibly grieving,
yes,
but you didn't complicate it with feeling guilty too.
No, the closure that Joe and I were able to have, it was a gift. I mean, that kind of dovetails right into my faith, my religion. I believe with my whole heart that the reason why Joe showed up with flowers was because God told him to, because God was preparing us for the inevitable.
That's a heavy insight, yeah. Wow. I hadn't thought about it like that. So there was something you had said, something about shoulding themselves. What does that mean?
As a mom, as a woman, as a wife, your guilt is compounded by the fact that you should have yourself to death. I should do this, I should do that.
You did pronounce that correctly, right?
Should have, yeah. Don't should on yourself. I should have done this, I should have done that. And looking backwards all the time is going to make you feel guilty, because you can't change what happened. You can only change what you could do in the future.
You just took my line.
I'm sorry.
What? Yeah, what? Yeah,
I read your book.
Yeah, see? Oh, good stuff, right? You too should read my book, right? So that's perfect. That's exactly what I talk about, right? It's like you can't change. The past is in the past, and you can't change it. All you can change is the future. So what I've learned in my studies is that many people sort of merge guilt and regret, and they kind of lump them in together. They kind of use them synonymously. And when I did my research, it turns out, no, they're totally different things. So guilt is, I did something wrong. I broke a rule. Regret is, I made a choice that didn't go so well. Now, these are very different things, but they have some similarities. So they're both involving things that happened in the past. They're both involving things that you can't necessarily change, okay? And the way into the future is I'm not gonna break the rule anymore, or I'm gonna make a different decision-making process. But they're not the same thing at all, because guilt is, hey, there was a rule and I broke it. And regret is, hey, somewhere along the line I made a choice, and as time unfolded, that choice turned out to be a bad choice, or it didn't come out as good as I would like it to be, right? So they're similar, but they're very different. Like childcare. So to me, women saying they felt guilty about childcare was they didn't break any rules based on a guy, right? Like as a guy, they didn't break any rules. They just made a choice to say, hey, I need to work because the money that brings in is important as me taking care of my kid. But they always felt like their choice is portioning out their time. They could have done more with their kids and less with work.
I feel guilty because at the time I was widowed. I was working 2 jobs. And my son was a senior in high school, and their soccer team was unbeatable. And they were headed towards the state championship, or so we thought. So because I had to take off time from my second job in order to go to the quarterfinals and the semifinals and the finals, I chose not to go to the quarterfinals because I knew I couldn't take off that many days, and they lost. So I missed my son's final soccer game as a high school player. And for that, I feel guilty. But you're telling me that shouldn't be guilty, that should be regret.
Yes.
But as a mother, I feel guilty.
That's a perfect example. Like, so you made a choice. And when we're making our choices, we go through this process, but really we're trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. And so then we're balancing what's going to happen in the future versus what's going on right now. And so you made the choice like, hey, the future, the chances of them winning are like way up there. And the chances of me getting enough days to be off are not up there. So I'm going to lean toward, hey, I'm going to not take that day off because they're going to win, and then I'll take the other 2 days off, right?
Right.
The negative feeling that you should have felt is regret. That's what regret's all about. But you didn't break any rules, which is what guilt's about, right? So now in the future, like if your next son, when he came along, my guess is you would have changed the process and thought about it differently and said, you know what, I'm just going to take off 3 days. That's just the way it's going to be. And if they don't like it, tough means I'll go find another job, right? When you're dealing with regret and guilt, you go into the future and say, what can I do differently to not have that situation happen again, right? So she could have said, oh, I'll just take off 3 days, or I won't take off any days, I just won't go, or I'll just take off and quit, or whatever. But now you can change because the decision you made the last time didn't go so well, so I'm going to make a different decision next time. Versus guilt, where you said, hey, I broke a rule. Then it comes down to, well, I can't break that rule ever again, right? So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is one of the ways to get rid of guilt is to learn how to forgive yourself. So there's a book that I'd read by Mafu and Desmond Tutu, and it's about forgiveness. And what it talks about is it's a 4-step process. And when you're trying to forgive somebody or somebody's trying to forgive you, you have to name your hurt and say, this is what hurts. So it's like, I lost someone. That's hurt. That hurts. And then 2 is you want to tell the story to somebody, because keeping a secret, that takes a lot of energy. And then the third part is asking for forgiveness. And part of asking for forgiveness is the idea that I'm going to change. It's not just saying, hey, please forgive me. It's, hey, please forgive me because I'm going to change and not do that again. And then the last piece is then you renew or you get rid of the relationship. And you go, okay, you know what? I forgive you, but we can't be together anymore. The problem with that is when you're dealing with yourself, you don't get to say that because you're always with yourself. You can't go, okay, I'm just not going to be with you anymore. So you really have to learn how to forgive yourself because you're going to be with yourself the rest of your life. So learning how to do that is by saying, hey, look, I broke this rule, but I'm not going to break the rule anymore. So then guilt did what it was supposed to do. Guilt made me change my behavior. So then guilt did what it was supposed to do, so I don't need to feel guilty anymore because I've already changed my behavior. If I do the behavior again, okay, now I need to feel guilty again and figure out how to forgive myself again, right? So these are all the things that will help you get past this. I think the last thing, and I think it goes along with your faith, is that when people die, based on most of the religions in the world, you're going to a better place. You're the one that's having the problem. You're the one having the loss. You're the one that's feeling bad that you didn't do something right. The person that died, they're in a better place. Learning how to forgive yourself is a really important thing. Not easy, but it's important. And so by doing that, then you can feel grief. I mean, you're going to feel grief, and we're going to talk about grief in more detail later on. When you're dealing with grief, you don't also need to feel guilt together. When you put those two together, that is really difficult. And so today we went through a number of different things that you can do so you don't have to feel guilty at the same time you're grieving the loss of a loved one. And there's more detail to this in my book, The Highway to Your Happy Place, A Roadmap to Less Stress. So go ahead and get that book because it goes into that and goes into some other things. And there's some other books that I'm in the process of writing that will go into some of the other stresses that are in our life. One of the things that I wanted to share with you was I was out in Los Angeles and I have just finished a book called The Mindset Matters. So I just finished this book. I worked with Jack Canfield and 29 other authors, and we put together this book called Mindset Matters. And I think that's an amazing book about how people use mindset to affect their own life. So my chapter's in there and it talks about some of the struggles that I've been through in my life, but how my mindset allowed me to overcome these. That book became a #1 bestseller. Yay, right? So I got this award, yay, it's called a Quilly. Where is it? There it is. Yes. For being a #1 bestseller. Yes, all right? But the more important part was I got to work with 29 other people and Jack Canfield. And that was the important part to me, not the award, right? Because that book has a lot of information that will help you live a better life. Then I also got an award, yay, for a podcast, My Happiness Highway. So this is called an ESPY, yes, and I got that award too. How nice is that? But again, the only reason I'm doing all this stuff is to help you. You are the important part. Like you feeling better, you spending more time in your happy place. That's why I'm doing all this work. That's why I have my wife up here, to help you get into your happy place and get rid of the things that are keeping you from your happy place. So I want to thank you for listening to us today. Thank you, Terri, for being here. You're freaking awesome all the time. I love it. So I want you to listen. I want you to subscribe. Tell your friends about us. We have a website, thelessstresseddoc.com. Email me if you have a question. It's lessstresseddoc@gmail.com. So I look forward to seeing you again in a couple weeks when we drop another episode. This is Dr. Gary Sprouse, the Less Stressed Doc, signing off for the Happiness Highway.